Welcome to the Five Forces of Change, a blueprint for leading successful change. My name is Anthony Greenfield. Over the last 20 years, I've worked with a wide variety of organizations, both large and small, in the public sector and in the private sector, all of whom have been dealing with change. What I'd like to do today is introduce you to a systematic and practical approach to dealing with leadership and people during times of change. Too often during change, there's a great deal of focus on planning, on project management, on executing tasks, and on processes and on systems and structures, to the detriment of people. This causes all kinds of repercussions and is often responsible for the failure of major change. The statistics make for grim reading. According to one survey by the UK government, 65% of all major changes in organisations fail. Other surveys tell a similar tale. The Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development survey in 2004 said employee attitudes and behaviour, specifically resistance to change, are the key constraints to effective organisational change. What I'd like to do in this presentation is to scratch below the surface to understand what's driving these attitudes and behaviours which are so restraining to effective organisational change. We live in a time of mind-boggling change. Between the years 1750 and 1900, the world's scientific knowledge doubled in size. Now that doubling takes place every 1 or 2 years. In January 2008, there were 875 million internet shoppers. In 1993, there were none. So in the face of all this change, organizations have no choice but to change, just to keep pace with the environment around them. In short, organizations have to change. But for people, it's optional. This may not seem obvious at first. Organizations feel that they've been through change, they've changed the structure, they've changed the processes, they've changed systems. They feel that the change is done and dusted, and yet people can be left behind. Often within mergers, many years later, individuals still feel part of their old organization and have not yet created that link or feeling of being part of the new merged organization. Change requires people to sacrifice time, energy, and emotion. People can become demotivated by change, causing performance to drop. But without people change, there is no change. Leading people through change is now a core skill for all managers and executives. For some, leading change, initiating and executing change, is the very definition of leadership. So the objectives of this presentation are to answer some simple yet vital questions. Why do people struggle with change? How can you work with a grain of human nature rather than against it to minimize disruption caused by change and to ensure that change sticks? So how do people respond to major change? There are a number of negative emotions and negative reactions to change, ranging from fear to immobility to anger to inward focus rather than outward focus to customers. All of these behaviors hinder change. However, there are a minority of people who see change as an opportunity and rise to the challenge of doing something new. These people are crucial in helping you spearhead change. But for a large number of people, change is seen in a negative context. The real question, though, is what lies behind the surface? What is the human psychology? What are the human needs and motivators that sit below the surface, driving these behaviors and these attitudes? If we can understand this, then we can pull the right levers, take the right approaches, and lead people far more effectively through change, avoiding the pitfalls that so typically hamper major change. If we go back to the work of Maslow and Herzberg in the 1950s and 1960s, they studied what motivates people, and specifically what motivates people at work. In order to understand why people react to change in the way that they do, it's important to look at how people are motivated at work and identify those areas that are most heavily impacted by change. And these can be reduced down to 5 key areas of motivation. These are the 5 forces of change which will form the framework for the rest of this presentation and are the key to leading successful change. Firstly, we have certainty. People's need for certainty about the future and their role within it. Then we have purpose, people's need for a greater sense of purpose and a purpose for change. The third force of change is control, our need for control over the things that affect us. The fourth force is connection, our connection to people, but also our connection to our organization and the way we do things around here. And finally, there is our need for success. All of these motivators are endangered by change. They can be undermined by change. And that lies at the root of the problem with change. Instead of having certainty, people feel uncertain. Instead of having a clear and definite purpose, people focus on short-term survival. Instead of feeling in control over their lives and over their work, people feel like helpless victims. Instead of feeling connected to their organization and the people around them, people feel a sense of loss. Finally, instead of feeling successful, people have a sense of failure as they struggle to get to grips with new ways of working. So now we can begin to see what lies below the surface of change and understand how, through effective leadership, we can eliminate many of the issues that so often beset change. So let's begin by looking at the first of the 5 forces of change, certainty. Certainty is our need for predictability and stability in our lives in general and particularly at work. Some of us have a strong desire for stability, things to remain unchanging. Others take a more exploratory attitude to the world. They're constantly looking for new opportunities, new ideas, and new ways of doing things. Of course, at different times of our lives, we may move along this continuum, and also there's a strong dependency on our personality and our personal circumstances. But it's very instructive to think about a given change at work in terms of where you'd place yourself on this continuum. How difficult is it going to be for you personally to deal with a period of uncertainty? Perhaps more importantly, how difficult is it going to be for your people? Who are those who prefer stability, and who are those who might be more prone to exploration and perhaps may be co-opted onto your project team? In exploring certainty, it's worthwhile thinking about how people adapt to new situations outside of their current experience. Take, for instance, joining a brand new organization. How do you find your way around? How do you work out how decisions are made and how you need to operate? In short, you observe what's going on. That includes talking to people, but more often than not, it's watching how people behave. How do they respond to customers? How do they deal with each other? Who's in charge? How are decisions made? How do people react to problems and to failures? And over a period of days or weeks or months, slowly piece together a mental map of the organization. With that mental map, you're able to navigate your way through your working life. You're able to make decisions, find the people you need to get things to happen, and generally to operate effectively in that organization. If you chose to arrive at that new organization and to navigate your way around using the same map that you had in your previous organization, you're likely to come unstuck quite quickly as you lead your way up blind alleys. So if you want to be efficient and effective, you've got to have a good mental map of your organization. And people who've been inside organizations for many years have a deeply ingrained map of how the organization works. During times of major change, old ways of working, old habits, old relationships must fall away, hopefully to be replaced by new ways. During the intervening period, there's a great deal of uncertainty, sometimes known as crazy time. People's mental map of the world is disturbed. This causes shock and confusion. can result in all sorts of negative behaviors. To give an example, there was a UK financial services company that was taken over by a US bank. As part of the acquisition, the bank introduced new customer relationship management system. They also introduced new reporting lines where people in the UK were reporting to people in Europe and in the US, depending on the type of business that they were doing with their customers. This resulted in a long period of crazy time. People were unclear whether the new customer relationship management system meant that they needed to work with their customers in a different way. There was fear that the new reporting lines meant that they would have less control over their own work. The truth was very different. The system would allow them to work more effectively with their customers. The reporting lines weren't restrictive, and the US company had a strong ethos of empowering business units. The problem was there was very little communication, so people assumed the worst, and crazy time went on for many months, and customer service suffered badly. If we look at performance during the life cycle of a change, what we often see is that as people enter a period of uncertainty, their performance falls away. This is because they're reacting with fear and confusion to the change. They might choose to fight it, they might choose to avoid it altogether. They can become distracted, and in their need for information, they may well listen to gossip and hearsay. As a result, customer service suffers, operational performance drops, people can behave dysfunctionally as they become distrustful of the change, and people may leave either mentally or physically from the organization. So it is absolutely vital to try and minimize any potential drop in performance, and this requires good leadership and the creation of a sense of certainty. It's helpful to think about how great leaders of the past have led people effectively during times of turbulence and uncertainty. When you consider these individuals, a number of themes emerge. Firstly, an unwavering sense of direction about where people need to go. Secondly, acting as a role model for change in both words and in deeds. And finally, communication, the ability to communicate a sense of direction in a compelling way, but also the ability to listen as well as to talk. During times of major change, it may be tempting not to communicate for fear of upsetting people. Quite the reverse is true, however. You need to over communicate. If you don't, then others will fill the information void with gossip and hearsay, causing all kinds of negative reactions. The other important point to remember about communication is that support for change is a slow process built up over time. So when you first communicate with people, you merely build awareness. You can talk about the causes of the change, the dangers of standing still, the purpose of the change, benefits to people, to organization. You can explain what's going to happen and provide a high level plan so that people have a clear sense of certainty and direction. But at this stage, people are merely aware about the change. So support for change is still in the early days. What you want to do is get people to move on to the next stage, which is questioning. You communicate again the purpose. You start to talk about the future, about expectations, delve into more detail, talk about what people will lose and what people will gain. But the important point is that people should start to ask questions. Once you've got people asking questions, then they're beginning to understand the change, get to grips with it, and process it in their own minds. Then you can move on to the exploring stage, where people start to get to grips with the change. They may go through training or practice on a pilot IT system, for instance. Again, you need to talk about the purpose for change. And you're starting now to get into people's roles, behaviors, the details of systems and processes and plans. And once you have them in the training room, you have a golden opportunity to really communicate what the change is about. Finally, once the change has happened, you still need to keep communicating to lock the change into the organization, advertise early wins, recognize people for their successes, and trumpet the benefits achieved, remembering that any stage during the process of moving from awareness to committing, people can drop out, support can fall away, if you stop communicating. Just remember that understanding does not mean acceptance. Napoleon Bonaparte said, "Leaders are dealers in hope." And that's a good summary of the first force of change, certainty. Leaders need to be passionate, visible, and confident. They need to lead by example through words, but especially through deeds. There needs to be a united view at all management levels. It's no use if the general communicates one thing and the captains and sergeants are saying something different. So it's vitally important to work first with the middle management levels before talking to everybody. It's vital to have a clear and unwavering sense of purpose. It's good to be honest and to tell people that you don't know and that you don't have all the answers. And of course, communication, two-way, open communication, avoiding the information vacuum, telling the bad news, and painting a vivid picture of the future are all vital. And finally, visible high-level plan to give people a sense of direction for the future. The second of the five forces of change is purpose. Purpose refers to our need for a sense of greater purpose. So why might an organizational mission or purpose be particularly important during times of major change? One way of looking at it is to say when you're heading into uncharted waters, it helps to have a compass. An organizational purpose provides a sense of direction and a level of confidence, much like a compass. In Collins and Porras's book, Built to Last, they examined what they called visionary companies, organizations that had not only survived for many decades, but had thrived and outstripped even successful competitors. They looked at what factors have allowed these organizations to be successful over many decades, despite their ups and downs. One of the key defining factors was that these organizations have a core ideology, purpose, and a very clear set of core values that are embedded across the organization. So having a clear purpose and a strong set of values is a crucial ingredient in standing the test of time. Of course, it's important to have a clear organizational purpose. Equally, it's important to have a clear purpose for the change itself. Let's consider what happens when a major change is imposed without a clear sense of purpose being communicated. People will naturally focus on the task in hand, whether that be changing a process, implementing a new warehouse, changing the way we deal with customers. When difficulties come along, it's going to be hard to make decisions without a clear view of where you're heading overall. People will assume different objectives, so efforts become undirected as people head off along different paths. There may well be feelings of change for change's sake, yet another initiative handed down by head office without a clear purpose. And then finally, when there are real difficulties encountered or budgets get tightened, these initiatives are likely to drift and may well be cancelled as soon as the pressure is on. So we can see that having a clear and compelling purpose for change is vital throughout the life cycle of the change, gives people a level of certainty, also motivates people to achieve something beyond the day-to-day, and aligns people without the need for detailed plans. Best way to understand this is through an example. Marks and Spencer's have something called Plan A. Simply stated, it says that Marks and Spencer's will be carbon neutral by 2012. They'll be the first UK large-scale retailer to be carbon neutral. This provides a very clear view of where they're going. It's very challenging, but it motivates people to try to achieve something beyond the day-to-day. Also aligns them easily without the need for detailed plans. Wherever you are within Marks and Spencer's, it's very easy to understand what your role is in bringing about Plan A. You work in stores, you have to reduce waste. You're in supply chain, you need to reduce food miles. You're in procurement, you need to purchase renewable energy. Even customers need to be involved through making green purchasing decisions. So what you can do is galvanize a very large and disparate group of people through the simplicity of a compelling and clear purpose for change. So, in summary, during times of major change, people can lose their sense of direction, and it's up to leaders to create a clear sense of purpose. You can do this, firstly, by reiterating your organization's purpose and values, the things that have made you successful over the long term. Then you need to communicate a clear and compelling purpose for the change to allow people to make quick decisions and will direct their energy. And then finally, you need to link the two together by illustrating how the change contributes to your overall organizational purpose and values. The third force of change is control. Control is our desire for control over the things that affect us. If you've ever been micromanaged, think about what that was like. Think about how that restricted your ability to innovate, to take the initiative, and to think for yourself. Having change imposed on you from the outside follows a similar pattern. You have feelings of loss of control. Particularly amongst managers, there's a feeling of loss of power and authority over what needs to be done and who needs to do it. And when change is imposed from the outside, we can be also made to look foolish, as if the things that we've been doing all along were somehow incorrect. So when faced with change imposed by others, the response is often either to fight or to flee. Fight involves picking holes in the change, looking for loopholes, opposing the change. Flight involves mentally checking out, just avoiding the change and hoping it'll blow over. Neither of these responses is, of course, helpful to making change happen. One great example of control during change is Jamie's School Dinners, which Jamie Oliver, a TV chef, attempted to change the eating habits of school children in the UK who'd been fed on a diet of processed and highly fried food for many, many years. The first school he worked in, he worked alongside the head cook, Nora. After convincing Nora and her team that they could cook healthy meals on a budget, he launched the meals inside the school and had some level of success. But there was still a hard core of kids that refused to eat the healthy food. What Jamie did next was very clever. He took those children into a classroom and taught them how to cook healthy food. This gave them a real feel for fresh fruit and vegetables, gave them a real sense of ownership for healthy food and a real understanding for what they were doing. This gave them a sense of control over the change, and at that point they were converted to healthy eating. But it wasn't all straightforward. As Jamie's initiative rolled out to many other schools, there was a backlash in one particular school in Rotherham. What was happening was, at break times, mothers were coming and taking orders and then returning at lunchtime with fried fish and chips and burgers and chips and pushing them through the railings. What had in fact happened was kids were coming home saying they hadn't eaten anything all day because they were being forced to eat this healthy food that they hated. So what mothers did was quite simply take control back for themselves. They were responsible for feeding their children. They took back control. The issue had been they hadn't been involved in the whole process of the conversion to healthy eating. So far from being irresponsible parents, they were merely taking control back for themselves. The story has a happy ending because Jamie Oliver is now working with the very same mums and teaching them to cook healthily. So control plays a vital part in gaining ownership of change. If we look at this graph, management style versus ownership for change, the more empowering people are in terms of their management style, the greater the ownership for change will be amongst those affected by it. If you simply tell people about the change, then all you'll get is unsolicited advice, people trying to pick holes, and so forth. As you move right along the continuum, become more empowering, eventually, as you get to the point where you start to involve people in the change, you start to get strong buy-in, even though it remains your project and your solution. Ideally, you want to give people power over the change, even if that only means the power to implement it in the way they need to within their own area of the organization. But the more control, the more involvement you give to people, the greater the ownership they'll take for change, and the far more opportunity for you to have a successful outcome. In terms of major change, ownership must begin at the top. It's vitally important to have senior sponsorship for change. You need to create a coalition of the willing at an executive level. You need enough leaders who are not only in favor of change, but willing to actively support change. Otherwise, your change will be doomed to failure. It's important also to get the right direct sponsor or leader for change. If in this diagram, those people shaded in red and amber are the people most affected by change, it may seem obvious that leader A would be the sponsor of that change. But often in organizations, that's not so. Where there's an IT change, people often put the IT director in charge. Where there's a cost-saving change, often the finance director is made the sponsor for change. Whilst those two individuals have a key role to play, it is leader A that needs to sponsor this given change, because the people most affected by change will look to their own direct leader for sponsorship. And if he or she is not giving their willing support, their willing and active support for change, then again, the change is doomed to founder. So in summary, those leading change need to give people affected by change control over the change so that they have a sense of ownership. They need to involve people in designing the solution and or allow people to implement the solution themselves in their part of the organization. The place to begin is with creating a coalition of the willing at a senior level so that they feel they have control over the change and take ownership for that change. The fourth force of change is connection. Connection is our emotional attachment to people and things. Some of us are more attached to people, to relationships with customers, suppliers, and of course our colleagues. Others are more attached to ideas, to principles, to ways of working, to habits, even to car parking spaces. So what happens during times of change? How do people feel about giving up habits, relationships, status symbols, physical objects? All of things that we create strong bonds with over time. When change comes along, we feel a real sense of loss as those bonds are broken. It's all too easy to ignore the emotions surrounding the breaking of connections. Often in organizations, people lack an appreciation of the effects of negative emotions. They expect you to leave emotions at home and not bring them into work. People may feel uncomfortable expressing emotions and often prefer to criticize the change itself or just to keep quiet. Leaders themselves may feel ill-equipped to deal with emotions. It's easier just to focus on plans and tasks. However, change requires managers to lead, to inspire, coach, influence, deal with emotions. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, psychologist, described a response to grief, where she explained that there was an emotional roller coaster that people had to follow before they gained acceptance of a major and often catastrophic change within their lives. Similarly, with major organizational change, people need time to travel along the path of emotion. If you insist that people jump to the end point, the emotions simply go underground, but they don't go away. They reoccur months or even years later in the form of resentment and anger and non-compliance with change. Moving along this emotional pathway involves endings, transitions, and new beginnings. We must give up and let go of our old attachments to people and things. Transition through a difficult period where we have to live with uncertainty and create new connections to people in different ways and with different things to establish a new order. So how do you help people let go of old connections and create new ones? One method is the timeline technique. An illustration of this is Ordnance Survey, UK-based organization that has an over 200 years of history of creating maps. They were facing an uncertain future with the arrival of digital mapping. What they did was they worked with all of their people to review the past and to contemplate the future. They ran a big event where they looked at past successes. They went back to the very first maps created by Ordnance Survey. They looked at how they'd embraced technology in the past, such as aerial photography in 1914. And as they thought about the past, acknowledged their successes, realized that they had innovated in the past, they were able to see the future in a different context and able to work out how they, as an organization and as individuals, needed to change in order to thrive into the future. This is a technique that is hugely useful during organization change to help people understand the upcoming change in the context of changes they've been through in the past, to see it as an evolution rather than as a revolution, and also allowing them to acknowledge that what came before was good and had its place, but what needs to come in the future has to respond to all sorts of external forces. Another useful and simple technique is a lose, keep, gain grid, in which people plot out what they will lose, what they will keep, and what they will gain as a result of the change. What this allows is for people to have a realistic perspective on what they will lose. It's unlikely that they will be losing everything. It's highly likely that they will be keeping most things, that most things will remain unchanged. And they also need to understand what it is that they stand to gain through the change. So overall, what are the leadership principles of connection? It's important to acknowledge past achievements and not to dismiss things that people hold dear. You need to place the current changes in the context of past changes so they feel more like an evolution than a revolution. It's important to surface and to deal directly with emotions. Help people identify what they will lose, keep, and gain through change. And finally, once you help people break their connections with the past, it's important to start to help them build connections with the future, their new relationships, and with the new ways of working. The fifth and final force of change is success. Success is our need to achieve goals. Success is a key motivator at work. But what happens to success during times of major change? The answer to that is the goalposts start to move. What was once seen as successful behavior is no longer seen as that. If you move your organization from focusing on output and quality to a focus on customer service, then you've changed the rules of the game about success. Let's look at a specific example of success during major change. A large high street clothing retailer wanted to change the way that sales assistants dealt with customers to improve sales. What they wanted them to do was to work with customers who were buying a particular item and help them select other items to match, creating an outfit. For many years, they'd spent their time simply helping customers find the right size or find the right color of a particular item. Now they were going to help to create an outfit. This would require huge change in the way people worked. What they realized was that their sales assistants might follow one of two paths. First off, they might try out the new methods for a while, find them difficult, perhaps find it embarrassing dealing with customers in a different way, and revert back to tried and trusted methods. Some of them might go through a period of pain, persist, and emerge the other end with hugely improved performance. So the question for them was, how do we minimize response A and maximize response B? So what they did was follow the process illustrated in this diagram. It began by defining success very clearly. What were the targets and expectations on people, but also what attitudes and behaviors would need to be demonstrated to create a new relationship with their customers. They then communicated this definition of success, mainly in the classroom through formalized training, giving people the opportunity to role play the new behaviors. What they realized, though, was the crunch came when people took action at work. So what they did was buddied people up together so that they could observe each other's behavior and that they could recognize and provide coaching to each other as they tried out the new ways of working. It's vital in avoiding curve A in the previous slide to give people encouragement when they found it difficult perhaps to work with customers in a different way. Buddies could give them encouragement. Managers also provided a crucial role in ensuring that people felt confident enough to live with a period of difficulty and emerge far more effective. So, what are the leadership principles behind the fifth force of change, success? Firstly, you need to clearly define what success looks like, the what, how, and why. You need to train people so they're able to succeed in the new world and to coach and encourage people through the learning curve as they get back to work. People need to be recognized individually. You need to allow it to be okay to fail, providing people have tried out the new methods, but not okay if they don't. You need to publicize and celebrate many successes and create new heroes out of the people who have tried the new methods, putting them into practice, and are eventually delivering higher levels of performance. So, in summary, leaders during times of major change need to create a greater sense of certainty through their passionate, confident leadership, through leadership by example, through open communication, and through a clear, unwavering sense of purpose. They need to reiterate their organization's sense of purpose and values, create a clear and compelling purpose for change, and link the change to the organization's overall purpose and its values. They need to give people a sense of control and a sense of ownership for change through consultation, through participation, and through empowerment. Leaders need to help people break with the past, acknowledge their loss, and reinforce new behaviors in new relationships, creating new connections. And finally, they need to nurture success, set people up to succeed, support new behaviors, and celebrate the successes. That concludes the 5 forces of change, a blueprint for leading successful change. More information can be found at www.5forcesofchange.com or by emailing me at anthony.greenfield@5forcesofchange.com. Thank you for listening.